You think you know what being invisible feels like until you hear your parents wish you away as a kitchen joke? I vanished that day without a single tear. The chilling part was not their laughter. It was that it took them 3 months to notice I was gone, and they only remembered me because they needed a signature for a loan I never approved. My name is Ruby Harris, and for 32 years, I lived under the impression that my presence in my parents' house was a necessity, if not a joy. I was the reliable one, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who paid the utility bills when the red notices came in the mail. I was the one who fixed the leaking faucets and the one who stayed quiet. I worked at Alder Fox Supply Company, a massive logistics warehouse where I spent my days managing inventory sheets and ensuring that boxes moved from point A to point B without incident. It was not a glamorous job, but it was steady. It paid the bills. It allowed me to pay the rent my parents charged me to live in the bedroom I had occupied since I was a child. It was a Tuesday when the world as I knew it ended. The shift manager, a man named Dave, who usually counted every minute of our time like he was paying us out of his own pocket, told me to clock out early. We were ahead of schedule for the quarterly audit, and he wanted to save on labor costs. I remember looking at the clock on the warehouse wall. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. I had never been home this early on a weekday. The sun was still high and bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete parking lot. I felt a strange sense of lightness as I walked to my car. Getting off early felt like a small, illicit victory. I decided to use the extra time to do something nice for Mark and Elaine. I stopped calling them Dad and Mom in my head years ago, though I never dared address them by their first names to their faces. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I wanted to buy dinner. I thought that if I brought home a full meal, something ready to eat, we could sit down together and maybe, just maybe, the tension that always hummed in the air like a high-voltage wire would dissipate for an evening. I bought a rotisserie chicken, the expensive kind with the lemon and herb seasoning that Elaine liked. I bought a tub of potato salad and a bag of those soft, sweet dinner rolls that Mark would tear apart and butter with aggressive enthusiasm. I stood in the checkout line and calculated the cost in my head. $28.50. It was not a small amount for a Tuesday, but I told myself it was an investment. I was investing in peace. I was trying to buy a moment where I wasn't just the tenant who lived upstairs, but a daughter. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Mark's truck and Elaine's sedan. They were both home. Usually, at this hour, the house was quiet. Mark would be in the garage tinkering with things that never seemed to get fixed, and Elaine would be watching her soaps in the living room with the volume turned up too high. But today, the house was silent from the outside. The windows were open to catch the spring breeze. I walked up the back steps to the kitchen door. The screen door was latched, but the inner door was wide open. I shifted the heavy paper bag of groceries to my left hip, feeling the warm heat of the chicken radiating against my side. I reached for the handle, ready to announce my arrival, ready to say, "Look, I brought dinner." But then I heard it. Laughter. It was not the polite, strained chuckle they used when neighbors came over. This was genuine, belly-shaking laughter. It was a sound so foreign to my ears that I froze. I could not remember the last time I had caused that sound. I stood there on the porch, my hand hovering inches from the metal handle of the screen door. Through the mesh, I could see them. Mark was leaning against the counter, peeling an orange. Elaine was sitting at the small round table, a mug of tea in her hands. They looked relaxed. They looked happy. Then Mark spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the screen. "God, the house is so peaceful today." Elaine nodded, blowing on her tea. "It really is. I got through 3 chapters of my book without being asked where the remote is or hearing about warehouse logistics." Mark laughed again, tossing an orange peel into the sink. "You know, sometimes I wish it was just Caleb. Things are just simpler with him." The air left my lungs. It didn't rush out. It simply vanished, leaving a cold vacuum in my chest. I stood absolutely still. The paper bag in my arms suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I waited. I waited for the punchline. I waited for Elaine to scold him, to say, "Oh, Mark, don't say that. Ruby does so much for us. Instead, Elaine sighed, a long sound of agreement. I know what you mean. Ruby is just so heavy. She walks into a room and the air gets thick. She makes everything feel like a burden. Caleb is easier. He's like a breeze. Ruby is like a wet blanket. A wet blanket that pays rent, Mark chuckled, though the joke lacked any warmth. But yeah, if we didn't need the extra cash, I'd turn that upstairs room into a gym, or a guest room for when Caleb visits. I'd much rather have Caleb visit than have Ruby live here. Amen to that, Elaine said. My hand was gripping the bottom of the grocery bag so hard that I could feel the paper tearing under my fingernails. My knuckles were white. The pain in my hand was the only thing grounding me to the earth. I felt a flushing heat rise up my neck, burning my cheeks. It was not anger. It was humiliation. Pure, distilled humiliation. They did not hate me. Hate would have been a passion. Hate would have meant I mattered enough to evoke a strong emotion. This was worse. They found me exhausting. They found my existence to be an inconvenience, a clutter in their otherwise pristine lives. They tolerated me because I paid them. I was not a daughter. I was a tenant they didn't like but couldn't legally evict without cause. Or perhaps wouldn't evict because they liked my money. Ruby makes everything heavy. The words echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my skull. I thought about the overtime I worked. I thought about the times I drove Elaine to her physical therapy appointments because Mark couldn't be bothered to leave his workshop. I thought about the times I sat with Mark in the hospital waiting room when his blood pressure spiked, holding his hand while Caleb was too busy at a party to answer his phone. I was heavy because I carried them. Caleb was light because he carried nothing. I took a step back. The floorboard on the porch creaked. Inside the kitchen, the laughter stopped instantly. "Did you hear that?" Elaine asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Probably just the wind," Mark said dismissively. "Or a squirrel." I did not wait to be discovered. I did not burst in and throw the rotisserie chicken at them. I did not scream. I did not demand an apology. I realized in that split second that an apology would be meaningless. You cannot apologize for how you feel. They felt I was a burden. No amount of "I'm sorry" would change the fact that their ideal life did not include me. I backed away, step by silent step. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned around. The sun was still shining. The birds were still singing. The world had not ended. Even though mine had just collapsed, I walked back to my car, opened the passenger door, and set the groceries on the seat. I didn't want them anymore. I didn't want to feed them. I looked back at the house one last time, through the kitchen window. I could see the refrigerator. The surface was covered in magnets, souvenirs from trips they had taken without me, photos of Caleb at his graduation, Caleb at the beach, Caleb winning a trophy, and there, tucked under a magnet shaped like the Eiffel Tower, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. I had seen it earlier that morning but hadn't looked closely. Now, from this angle, with the afternoon sun hitting it, I saw my name scrawled on the front in Elaine's handwriting. Ruby. It looked official. It looked important. For a second, curiosity warred with the numbness spreading through my body. I almost went back. I almost walked in to grab it. But then I heard Mark's laughter ring out again, loud and unburdened. If I went back in, I would have to speak to them. I would have to see their faces change from joy to annoyance when they realized I was there. I would have to exist in their space, the heavy thing that ruined their afternoon. No. I got into the driver's seat and closed the door. The silence inside the car was absolute. I started the engine. I did not look at the rearview mirror as I backed out of the driveway. I drove down the street, obeying every stop sign, using my turn signal at every corner. My heart was beating with a strange, slow rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. It was a terrifying calmness. It was the calmness of a soldier who realizes the war is lost and puts down their rifle. I drove straight to the bank. It was 4:45 in the afternoon. The lobby was empty. I walked up to the teller, a young woman named Sarah, who I had spoken to a dozen times. "I would like to make a withdrawal," I said. My voice sounded flat, like a recording. Sure, Ruby, Sarah said, smiling. How much? Everything, I said. I want to close the checking account and the savings account. Sarah blinked. Everything? Are you sure? That is a big decision. I am sure, I said. She processed the transaction. I watched her count out the bills. It wasn't a fortune. It was $3,420. That was the sum total of my life savings after paying rent, utilities, and covering the incidental expenses Mark and Elaine always seemed to have. Here you go, Sarah said, sliding the heavy envelope of cash under the glass. Is everything okay, Ruby? Everything is fine, I said. Everything is finally light. I took the cash. I walked out to my car. I left the car in the bank parking lot. I didn't want it. The car was registered in Mark's name, even though I made the payments. If I took it, they would report it stolen. They would use it as a reason to drag me back. I wanted to give them no ammunition. I left the keys in the ignition and the bag of groceries on the passenger seat. Let them have the lemon herb chicken. Let them have the car. I walked 3 blocks to the Greyhound station. The terminal smelled of diesel and stale coffee. I approached the ticket counter. Next bus leaving the state? I asked the man behind the glass. We have a bus to Stonebridge leaving in 20 minutes, he said, barely looking up from his newspaper. It is a 3-hour ride. One way, I said. $42, he grunted. I paid him with a $50 bill and told him to keep the change. I sat on the hard plastic bench and waited. I had no luggage. I had the clothes on my back, my work uniform, a pair of jeans, and sturdy boots. I had my phone, which I pulled out of my pocket. I looked at the screen. No missed calls, no texts. I opened the settings menu. I scrolled down to the factory reset option. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the button. I watched the screen go black, then light up with the manufacturer's logo as it erased every photo, every message, every contact. I pulled the SIM card out of the side of the phone and snapped it in half. I dropped the pieces into the trash can next to the vending machine. When the bus rolled in, a massive silver beast hissing air brakes, I stood up. I felt lighter. Elaine was right. I had been heavy. I had been carrying the weight of trying to be loved by people who were incapable of loving me the way I needed. I had been carrying the weight of their expectations, their bills, their subtle cruelties. I stepped onto the bus and walked to the back. I sat by the window as the bus pulled out of the station and merged onto the highway. I watched the city of my birth slide away. I watched the familiar streets, the shops I frequented, the skyline I knew by heart, all recede into the distance. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I thought about the kitchen. I thought about the envelope on the fridge, the one I left behind. Ruby. Whatever was in that envelope, whatever critical document or message they had deemed important enough to magnet to the fridge, but not important enough to hand to me. It belonged to the old Ruby, the heavy Ruby, the Ruby who existed. That Ruby was gone. I watched the mile markers flash by. 1, 2, 10, 20, with every mile. The tether between me and that house stretched thinner and thinner, until finally, somewhere between the city limits and the open highway, it snapped. I was invisible now, and for the first time in my life. Being invisible didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a weapon. The rhythmic thumping of the bus tires against the asphalt created a hypnotic trance, allowing my mind to drift back to the house I had just fled. As the distance between me and the zip code I had memorized since childhood grew, the clarity of my situation sharpened. It was not just the comment in the kitchen that drove me away. That was merely the final cut in a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was the realization that I had spent years paying for a seat at a table where I was never actually welcome. The arrangement, as Mark and Elaine had pitched it to me when I turned 22, was simple and sounded responsible. They told me that living at home was a privilege, not a right, and to teach me the value of the dollar, I would pay what they called a surcharge. It was $650 a month, They claimed it covered my share of the utilities, the internet, and the wear and tear on the house, but the real currency I paid with was not legal tender. It was silence. The unwritten rule of the Harris household was that the atmosphere had to remain pristine. My role was to be a ghost who paid rent. I bought my own groceries because Elaine claimed my diet was too complicated, even though I ate the same food they did. I did my own laundry at a laundromat 3 miles away because Mark said the noise of the washing machine disturbed his evening news. Even though the machine ran perfectly fine when Caleb used it. Caleb. My brother was 26 years old, 6 years my junior, and he occupied a space in that house that defied physics. He was the sun, and we were all just planets orbiting his moods. If Caleb came home in a bad mood, the entire house walked on eggshells. If Caleb was happy, we were all expected to bask in his glow. He was the golden child, a title he didn't even have to earn. He just had to exist. I used to think it was just his personality. He was charismatic, loud, and demanding, but over the years, sitting in the corner of the living room pretending to read while observing them, I realized it was a system. Mark and Elaine had built a stage, and Caleb was the only actor they had cast. I was the stagehand, meant to keep the props in order and stay out of the spotlight. I remember the day I paid off my student loans. It had taken me 8 years of double shifts and skipped vacations. I came home with the letter in my hand, a physical testament to my discipline. I walked into the living room where the television was blaring a game show. "I did it," I said, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. "I made the final payment. I am debt-free." Mark glanced away from the screen for less than 2 seconds. "That is good. Ruby. Responsible." Elaine didn't even look up from her knitting. "Finally. Now maybe you can stop complaining about money." 10 minutes later, Caleb walked in. He had just quit his 3rd job in 6 months because the manager did not appreciate his creative vision. He threw his keys on the table and announced he was going to start a YouTube channel about retro video games. Mark muted the television. Elaine put down her knitting needles. They leaned in, their faces bright with interest. "That is a bold move, son," Mark said, nodding seriously. "You have always had a great voice for broadcasting." "We are so proud of you for following your dreams," Elaine added, beaming. "Do you need any new equipment? We want to support you." I sat there, the letter about my financial freedom crumpling in my fist. My decade of struggle was a footnote. Caleb's whim was a headline. It was not that they hated my success. It was that my success required nothing from them. So it gave them no opportunity to play the benevolent parents. Caleb's failures required their help, which made them feel needed. That was the dynamic. Elaine had a way of speaking to me that felt like being wrapped in a blanket made of steel wool. She never raised her voice. She used soft, sighing sentences that cut deeper than any scream. "You are just so sensitive, Ruby," she would say when I pointed out that they had forgotten my birthday for the 2nd year in a row. "It makes it so hard to talk to you. You twist everything." Or the classic, "You tire me out. Ruby, you always have to make things about fairness. Life isn't fair. Why can't you just go with the flow like your brother?" Mark played the role of Switzerland. He prided himself on being neutral, but in a house where one person is being erased, neutrality is just complicity. He would pull me aside after Elaine had said something particularly cruel and whisper, "Just let it go, Ruby. You know how she is. Just keep the peace." Keeping the peace always meant silencing me. It never meant asking Elaine to be kinder or asking Caleb to be considerate. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because of a pathetic, deeply human weakness. I did not need a parade. I did not need them to throw me a party. I just wanted to be seen. I kept thinking that if I worked hard enough, if I fixed enough things, if I was useful enough, one day they would look at me and see a person, not a utility. Caleb knew this. He sensed my desperation for approval like a shark senses blood. He used me constantly, and I let him because it was the only time he spoke to me as an equal. "Hey, Rube," he would say, using the nickname I hated. My registration expired, and the DMVI website is a nightmare. Can you handle it for me? I would spend 2 hours navigating the bureaucracy, paying the late fees with my own card because he forgot his wallet, and print out the confirmation. When I handed it to him, he would snatch it without looking at me. Cool, thanks. That was it. No eye contact, no reimbursement for the fees, just a transaction completed. There was one Saturday, about 4 months ago. That should have been the day I left. Caleb had gone out of town for a concert with his girlfriend, Tessa, and his laptop was sitting open on the kitchen counter. I was cleaning the kitchen, a chore that was technically everyone's but realistically mine, when the screen lit up with a notification. It was an email from the bank. I am not a snoop. I respect privacy, but the subject line caught my eye because it contained my name. Transfer confirmation. Recurring deposit from Ruby Rent. I froze. The sponge dripped soapy water onto the floor. Mark and Elaine had always told me that the money I paid them was being put aside. We are not spending your money, Ruby. Mark had said solemnly when I moved back in. We are putting half of it into a savings account for you. When you are ready to buy a house or get married, you will have a nest egg. We are doing this for your future. It was the one thing that made the $650 feel justified. It was forced savings. It was proof they cared about my long-term well-being. My hand trembled as I touched the trackpad. The email was a notification of a transfer. It showed $650 moving from the holding account into a different account. I clicked on the destination account. It was labeled Caleb Future Fund. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring before my eyes. I scrolled back through the history, every month, for the last 4 years. On the first of the month, my check would clear, and on the second of the month, the entire amount, 100% of it, was transferred to Caleb's fund. There was no nest egg for Ruby. There was no savings account waiting for my wedding or my first home. I was not paying for my future. I was subsidizing Caleb's. I was paying for his car insurance, his startup equipment, his concert tickets, his life. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the granite countertop. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to print out the pages and tape them to the refrigerator over their precious family photos. But I didn't. I heard the garage door opening. Mark and Elaine were home from their Saturday shopping trip. Panic, irrational and sharp, seized me. I closed the laptop. I went back to scrubbing the counter. When they walked in, laughing about something they had seen at the mall, I said nothing. I didn't ask about the money. I didn't confront them. I was too paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. If I asked, they would have an excuse. They would say it was a temporary loan. They would say I was misinterpreting things. They would say I was being heavy and sensitive again, so I swallowed it. I swallowed the bile and the anger, and I let it sit in my stomach like a stone. I told myself I needed more proof, or a better plan, or just the courage to face the truth that my parents were stealing from me to prop up the child they actually wanted. I continued to pay the rent for 4 more months, $2,600 more, poured into the black hole of Caleb's future. Now, sitting on this bus, as the city lights faded into the darkness of the highway, I realized that the comment in the kitchen wasn't a revelation. It was just a confirmation. They didn't just wish I didn't exist. They had been financially cannibalizing my existence to feed Caleb's. I looked out the window at my reflection in the dark glass. A ghost who paid rent. Well, the rent was due today, and for the first time in 10 years, the landlord was going to find the unit empty. I leaned my head against the cool glass. I wondered how long it would take them to notice the money stopped coming. Probably longer than it would take them to notice I was gone. The bus hit a bump, and I didn't flinch. I was done being the foundation they walked on. Let Caleb be the foundation now. Let's see how much weight the golden child can hold before he cracks. The bus ride to Stonebridge took exactly 3 hours, but in my mind, it felt like crossing a time zone into a different century. I arrived at the terminal at 8:15 in the evening. The air here smelled different, less like exhaust and more like damp earth and river water. I walked the 2 miles to the address I had memorized years ago. It was a pre-war brick building with a fire escape that zigzagged down the front like a metal scar. I rang the buzzer marked 4B. There was a long pause, then the static crackle of the intercom. "Who is it?" "It is Ruby," I said. "Ruby Harris." The buzzer buzzed. A long, angry sound that unlocked the heavy glass door. I walked up the 4 flights of stairs because I did not trust the elevator. My legs felt heavy, not from exertion, but from the sheer weight of the decision I had made. When I reached the 4th floor, the door to 4B was already open. Maya Grayson stood in the doorway. We had not seen each other in 2 years. Not since she moved here for a graphic design job that she said paid peanuts, but fed her soul. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt with a paint stain on the collar. She looked at me, empty-handed, wearing my work uniform. Eyes red-rimmed, but dry. She did not gasp. She did not scream my name. She did not ask where my car was or why I was standing there on a Tuesday night. She just stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. I stepped inside. The apartment was small, cluttered with canvases and half-finished sketches. It smelled of turpentine and lavender. "I need a place to sleep," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet room. "Just for a while. I have money. I can pay for groceries. I just need a sofa." Maya looked at me for a long moment. She had always been the observant one in college, the one who could tell when a professor was bluffing or when a boyfriend was lying just by the way they held a coffee cup. "The sofa pulls out," she said. "The sheets are in the closet by the bathroom. There is a spare key in the bowl on the counter." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat that I swallowed down violently. "I do not know how to explain what happened," I said. Maya walked over to the counter, picked up the silver key, and pressed it into my hand. The metal was cool against my palm. "Here, no one forces you to explain," she said. "You talk when you want, or you never talk. It is your call." That was how I disappeared. It was not a cinematic event. There were no high-speed chases or dramatic confrontations in the rain. It was just a quiet exchange of keys and a pull-out sofa bed that squeaked when I turned over. The next morning, I went into operational mode. I treated my disappearance like a logistics problem at the Alderfox warehouse. Step 1 was severing the digital tether. I went to a discount electronics store and bought a cheap smartphone with a prepaid SIM card. I paid cash. I did not transfer my contacts. I did not log into my old email. I created a new email address, rhstonebridge@email.com. It was functional. It was anonymous. Step 2 was finance. I walked into a credit union that had no branches in my hometown. I opened a checking account with $2,000 of the cash I had brought. The teller asked if I wanted to order checks with a design on them. I chose the plain gray ones. I did not want puppies or sunsets. I wanted to be invisible. Step 3 was income. I could not apply for jobs that required a background check that might alert my parents. Nor did I want anything that required me to use my brain. I wanted to be a pair of hands. I wanted to be a back. I signed up for 3 different gig work apps using my new number. My life became a series of disconnected tasks. On Monday, I was a furniture assembler. I drove to a stranger's house in a rented van and spent 4 hours putting together a Swedish wardrobe for a young couple who argued about paint colors while I silently screwed hinges into particle board. On Tuesday, I was a delivery driver for a local bakery, hauling crates of sourdough and baguettes to cafes around the city. The smell of yeast and flour clung to my clothes, masking the scent of the warehouse that I used to carry. On Wednesday, I worked a shift at a garden center, hauling 50-pound bags of mulch and soil into the trunks of luxury SUVs. I made $18 an hour on average. It was less than I made at Alderfox, but my expenses were zero. I paid Maya $300 a week, which she tried to refuse, but I left it on the counter every Friday morning under the sugar bowl. I ate cheap. Ramen, eggs, apples. I did not log onto social media. I did not deactivate my old Facebook or Instagram accounts. That would have sent a notification to my friends, which would have trickled back to Caleb. Instead, I just stopped. I let the algorithm think I was bored. I let my digital self collect dust. I became a file that wasn't deleted, just archived in a folder no one ever opened. The days were easy. The physical labor was a blessing. When your muscles are screaming from lifting heavy boxes, your brain doesn't have the energy to replay the sound of your father laughing at your non-existence. I worked until I was exhausted. I came home, showered, ate, and stared at the wall. But the nights were different. At night, the silence of the apartment was loud. I would lie on the sofa bed, staring at the shadows the streetlights cast on the ceiling. I felt like a stranger in my own body. I would look at my hands, the same hands that had cooked dinner for Mark and Elaine, the same hands that had signed checks for Caleb's insurance, and they looked alien to me. I was unmoored. I had defined myself for so long by my utility to others that without them, I wasn't sure what shape I was supposed to take. For 2 weeks, I was a machine. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just functioned. Then came the tea. It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 14 days after I had left. I was at the grocery store, picking up milk for Maya. I turned down the tea aisle, looking for the breakfast blend she liked. My eyes drifted to the middle shelf. There it was, the box of chamomile and honey tea with the yellow flowers on the packaging. It was Elaine's tea. A vivid memory assaulted me. It was from 3 years ago. Elaine had the flu. She was miserable, coughing and shivering in bed. I had left work early, losing 4 hours of pay, to come home and take care of her. I made her this tea. I put exactly 1 teaspoon of honey in it, just the way she liked. I sat by her bed and read to her until she fell asleep. When she woke up, she smiled at me, a weak, genuine smile, and said, "That tea was perfect, Ruby." It was one of the few crumbs of affection I had hoarded in my heart. I stood there in the middle of the grocery aisle, clutching a carton of almond milk, and I felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't a clean break, it was a shattering. I abandoned the cart. I walked out of the store. I walked the 6 blocks back to Maya's apartment, my breath coming in short. Ragged gasps. I got inside, locked the door, and slid down to the floor of the kitchen. The grief hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the polite, silent crying I had done in my bedroom for years. This was ugly. It was guttural. I curled into a ball on the cold linoleum, my forehead pressed against the cabinet, and I wailed. I cried for the lemon chicken I left in the car. I cried for the money I had wasted on Caleb's future. I cried for the little girl who thought that if she just got straight A's, her father would look at her the way he looked at her brother. I didn't hear Maya come home. I only realized she was there when I felt a hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just sat down on the floor next to me, her back against the dishwasher, and let me fall apart. We sat there for a long time. The only light came from the street lamp outside the window. Finally, the sobs turned into hiccups. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt. My eyes burned. "They laughed," I whispered. My voice was raspy, broken. Maya didn't ask who. She knew. "I walked up to the door," I said, staring at the pattern on the linoleum. "And they were in the kitchen, laughing. Dad said he wished it was just Caleb." Mom agreed. She said I was heavy. She said life would be easier without me. I looked at Maya. They laughed. Maya, like it was a joke, like my absence would be the punchline to a happy life. Maya looked at me. Her expression was fierce, her jaw set tight. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell me that they didn't mean it, or that families are complicated. She didn't try to fix it. "The problem isn't that you left, Ruby," Maya said, her voice low and steady. "The problem is that they didn't notice." Her words hung in the air, stripping away the last layer of my denial. She was right. If I had mattered, my silence would have been deafening to them. Instead, my silence was exactly what they wanted. They were enjoying the peace. They were enjoying the house without the heavy daughter. I took a deep breath. It shuddered in my lungs. "I am not going back," I said. "Good," Maya said. "Do not." My phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart seized. It was the new phone. Only 3 people had the number: Maya, the temp agency, and the bank. But when I pulled it out, I saw a notification from a messaging app I hadn't realized was still linked to my old cloud account. It was a direct message on a platform I rarely used. It was from Caleb. For a second, a foolish, hopeful part of me thought, he noticed. He is worried. He is asking where I am. I opened the message. It was not a text. It was not a question. It was a meme. It was a video of a cat falling off a table with the caption, "When you try to adult and fail." Below the video, he had written, "LOL. This made me think of you." But it wasn't the meme that froze my blood. It was the location tag attached to the message. He must have had location services turned on by accident. The Golden Steakhouse, downtown, and then, a second later, a photo followed. It was a selfie. Caleb was holding up a glass of champagne. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, were Mark and Elaine. They were clinking glasses. They were smiling. There was a plate of calamari on the table. The appetizer they only ordered for special occasions because it was $22 a plate. They were at the most expensive steakhouse in town. On a Tuesday night, I zoomed in on the photo. On the table, next to Caleb's elbow, was a piece of paper. It looked like a letter of acceptance or a contract. They weren't looking for me. They weren't wondering why the house was quiet or why my car wasn't in the driveway. They were out to dinner. Celebrating. I looked at the timestamp. Sent 2 minutes ago. "What is it?" Maya asked. Seeing the color drain from my face, I held up the phone. "Caleb sent me a meme," I said, my voice dead calm. "They are at the Golden Steakhouse. They are celebrating." Maya looked at the photo. "Celebrating what?" "I do not know," I said, "but they are spending the money I paid for rent on calamari and champagne, while I am sleeping on your floor." I didn't cry again. The tears were gone. In their place was something colder, harder. It was the clarity of a diamond. I turned off the phone. "You were right," I said to Maya. They did not notice. I stood up from the kitchen floor. My legs were steady. "But they will," I said. "Eventually." I didn't know then how right I was. I didn't know that my disappearance was a ticking clock, and that the alarm was set for exactly 3 months from the day I walked out. I just knew that for tonight, I was done being the victim. I went to the sink and washed my face. I looked in the mirror. The heavy Ruby was gone. The invisible Ruby was here, and she had work to do. The silence was not empty. It was a living, breathing thing that sat on my chest every morning when I woke up. I became a collector of days. I counted them like beads on a rosary of neglect. Week 1 passed. My phone sat on the nightstand, a black monolith that refused to light up. I checked the signal strength 5 times a day. It was full bars. The network was working. The silence was not technical. It was personal. Week 2 passed. I went to work at the furniture assembly gig. I drove screws into cheap particle board and thought, surely, by now, they have noticed the missing car. Surely. Mark has gone to the garage to look for his torque wrench and realized the set is disorganized because I am not there to clean it. Surely. Elaine has run out of her special tea. Week 4 passed, then week 8. The silence morphed from a sharp pain into a dull, throbbing ache. It was a confirmation of my darkest hypothesis. I had always suspected that I was the load-bearing wall they complained about but could not live without. I was wrong. I was not a wall. I was a piece of furniture they had simply moved to the garage and forgotten about. The only ripple in the stagnant water came on a Thursday in the middle of the 2nd month. It was an email. It arrived in my old inbox, the one I checked once a week from a library computer just to ensure no legal notices had been served against me. The subject line read, "Family Update / Labor Day BEQ." My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands shook as I moved the mouse cursor. This was it. This was the frantic plea. This was the apology. I clicked open the email. It was a group thread. It was addressed to 20 people. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and Caleb, and me. I was just one address in a sea of recipients. Hi, everyone. Elaine had written, "We are hosting the barbecue this year. I am making the potato salad. Aunt Sarah, can you bring the pies? Caleb is handling the grill." I scanned the text, looking for my name. I found it at the very bottom, almost as an afterthought, sandwiched between a reminder about parking and a note about the dog. Ruby, if you are free, let us know if you are coming so we can get a head count. Otherwise, we assume you are busy. I sat in the fluorescent hum of the public library and stared at the screen until my eyes burned. If you are free, assume you are busy. There was no, "Where are you?" There was no, "We are worried." There was no, "Please come home." It was a masterclass in gaslighting written in Arial font. They were rewriting reality in real time, to the rest of the family. I wasn't missing. I was just busy. I was the distant daughter, the difficult one who couldn't be bothered to show up for family events. They had turned my disappearance into a character flaw. I did not reply. I did not hit delete. I left the email there, marking it as unread. I wanted to see how long they could keep the play going. I wanted to see how long they could pretend the stage was full when one of the actors had walked out the back door. The 3-month mark approached. I had settled into a routine. I was working 40 hours a week between 3 different gig apps. I had my own apartment now, a tiny studio above a bakery that smelled permanently of yeast and burnt sugar. It was small, but the rent was mine. The keys were mine. The silence in the room was of my own making, not imposed by anyone else. Then came the phone call that turned the silence into a siren. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a delivery drop-off, carrying a box of organic vegetables to a porch in the suburbs. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number with a local area code. I usually ignored these calls, assuming they were telemarketers or scams, but something made me answer. Maybe it was the intuition that comes from living in a state of hypervigilance for 90 days. "Hello?" I said, balancing the box on my hip. "Hi, may I speak with Ruby Harris?" The voice was professional, female, and clipped. "This is she?" "Ruby, this is Jennifer calling from the Fraud Prevention Department at Horizon Valley Bank. I am calling to verify some activity on a recent application. Do you have a moment?" I frowned. Horizon Valley Bank. That was the bank my parents used. It was the bank where I had closed my accounts 3 months ago. "I do not have an account with you anymore," I said, walking back to my van. "I closed everything 3 months ago." "I see that here," Jennifer said. The typing on her end was loud and fast. "But we received an application yesterday for a new personal line of credit in the amount of $25,000. It was submitted in person at our Stone Creek branch." I froze. My hand gripped the door handle of the van. The Stone Creek branch was 3 blocks from my parents' house. "I did not apply for a line of credit," I said. My voice was steady, but my stomach dropped. "I am not even in the city." "Okay," Jennifer said. Her tone shifted from polite to alert. "We flagged it because the income stated on the application is significantly higher than what we have on file from your previous history. And the employment information lists a company called Caleb's Media Ventures as the employer. We just wanted to confirm before moving to the underwriting stage." The world tilted on its axis. "Jennifer," I said, squeezing my eyes shut, "read me the applicant's address. It is listed as 402 Maplewood Drive." My parents' house. "And the social security number?" She read the last 4 digits. They were mine. "Okay," I said. I opened the van door and sat in the driver's seat. I needed to sit down. "Jennifer, listen to me carefully. That is a fraudulent application. I did not authorize it. I do not work for Caleb's Media Ventures. I do not live at that address anymore. You need to cancel that application immediately." "I understand," Jennifer said. "I am marking this as fraud. We will stop the process. However, Ruby, since the application was made in person with what appeared to be valid identification, we are going to need you to come into a branch or file a police report to formally contest this if they try to push it through." "Valid identification?" I asked. "How?" "The notes here say The applicant presented a driver's license. My driver's license, the one I had left in the glove compartment of the car I abandoned, the car that was registered to Mark. "Thank you, Jennifer," I said. "Please freeze everything." I hung up. I sat in the hot van for 5 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. This was not a mistake. This was not a clerical error. This was theft. I drove home. I did not turn on the radio. My mind was racing, connecting dots that I didn't want to connect. When I got to my apartment, I opened my laptop. I had been avoiding looking at my credit report because I wanted to sever all ties. But now I had no choice. I went to the credit monitoring site. I typed in my information. I answered the security questions. What was the make of your first car? What is your mother's maiden name? The dashboard loaded. A bright red alert sat at the top of the screen. New hard inquiry. Horizon Valley Bank. Date. Yesterday. But that wasn't the only one. I scrolled down. New account. Sapphire Rewards credit card. Status. Pending. Credit limit. $15,000. New account. Quick Loan Personal Finance. Status. Open. Balance. $5,000. They had been busy. In the last 48 hours, someone had gone on a spree. They were hitting my credit like a piñata. I clicked on the details for the Quick Loan account. It was a high-interest lender, the kind that gives you money same day if you have a pulse and a pay stub. The loan had been disbursed yesterday. $5,000. Gone. In my name. I felt a cold rage washing over me. It was different from the sadness I had felt in Maya's kitchen. This was clinical. This was the feeling of a surgeon looking at a tumor that needs to be cut out. They thought I was gone. They thought I was dead, or indifferent, or simply too weak to fight back. They thought my credit score was just another resource in the house they could use, like the leftover groceries in the fridge. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the credit bureau. I navigated the automated hell of voice prompts. "I need to place a freeze on my credit," I told the automated voice. "Reason? Identity theft. I did it for all 3 bureaus. TransUnion, Equifax, Experian. I locked the doors. I pulled up the drawbridge. Then I went back to the Horizon Valley Bank application details on the credit monitoring report. Sometimes, the credit report captures the loan purpose field from the application data. I expanded the tab. There it was. Loan purpose. Event costs and venue deposit. I stared at the words. Event costs. I opened a new tab. I typed in Caleb Harris into the search bar. I hadn't looked him up in 3 months. His public Instagram profile popped up. The first post was from 3 days ago. It was a picture of Caleb and Tessa, his girlfriend of 2 years. They were standing in front of a white gazebo at the Grand Oak Estate, the most expensive wedding venue in the county. The caption read, "She said yes. We are making it official. Big things coming soon." Wedding season, the Harris wedding. I looked at the date. 3 days ago. The loan application was submitted yesterday. The pieces slammed together with the force of a car crash. Caleb had proposed. He wanted the dream wedding. He wanted the Grand Oak Estate, but Caleb was a content creator with 3 failed channels and a part-time job. He probably just quit. Mark and Elaine had no savings because they spent it on maintaining the illusion of an upper-middle-class life. So they looked around for a resource. They looked for the one thing in the house that had value and no voice. Me. They were using my credit, my name, my financial history to pay for Caleb's wedding. They weren't just erasing me. They were harvesting me. I looked at the screen. I looked at Caleb's smiling face. I looked at the diamond ring on Tessa's finger, a ring that I was probably paying for right now through that $5,000 quick loan. I closed the laptop. For 3 months, I had wondered if they loved me. Now I had my answer. You do not steal from people you love. You do not commit felonies against people you miss. They didn't miss Ruby the daughter. They missed Ruby the ATM. They missed Ruby the collateral. I stood up and walked to the window. The street below was busy with people rushing home to their families. I picked up my phone again. I dialed a number I had found on a legal aid website a week ago, just in case I needed to file for a name change. Law offices of Miller and Stone. A receptionist answered. "Hi," I said. My voice was no longer the voice of the girl who cried on the kitchen floor. It was the voice of the woman who had walked out into the sun. "I need to speak to a lawyer regarding identity theft and fraud." "Certainly," the receptionist said. "Can you tell me who the suspected perpetrator is?" I looked at the calendar on the wall. It had been exactly 3 months. "Yes," I said. "My parents and my brother." The silence on the other end was brief, but palpable. "I see," she said. "When can you come in?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. 9 o'clock. I hung up. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. It wasn't chamomile. It was strong, black tea. I drank it standing up. I was not going to scream. I was not going to post on Facebook. I was not going to drive to their house and bang on the door. They wanted a wedding? They wanted an event? I would give them one. But it wasn't going to be the reception they planned. The paper trail they had started was going to lead right back to their front door. And this time, I wouldn't be there to sweep it under the rug. I was about to become the most expensive mistake they ever made. The office of Miller & Stone was located on the second floor of a building that smelled of floor wax and serious decisions. It was not the kind of place where people went to cry. It was the kind of place where people went to settle scores using statutes instead of fists. I sat across from Elias Thorne, a civil attorney with gray hair and a suit that cost more than my entire previous existence cost in a year. He had my credit report spread out on his mahogany desk like a map of a battlefield. "It is straightforward, Ms. Harris," Thorne said, removing his reading glasses. "Someone used your personal identifying information to apply for a line of credit and a high-interest loan. Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act and federal law, this is identity theft, pure and simple." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "However, given the address and the employment details you flagged, we are likely dealing with familial fraud. That makes the legal mechanism the same. But the emotional fallout is usually messier." "I am not worried about the mess," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 3 months building walls instead of bridges. Thorne leaned back. "You have 2 choices. Option A is the soft approach. You contact them, demand they pay it off, and hope they listen. You keep the police and the banks out of it. This usually results in you paying the debt eventually because criminals, even related ones, rarely have a change of heart. Option B is the hard line. We file a fraud affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission. We file a police report here in Stonebridge stating that you are a victim of identity theft. We send those official documents to the banks. The banks will then be legally required to close the accounts and investigate. But once that wheel starts turning, Ruby, you cannot stop it. If the bank traces it to your brother or your parents, they will prosecute. Bank fraud is a felony." He paused, letting the weight of the word felony hang in the air between us. "Are you prepared to send the police to your parents' door?" he asked. I looked at the window behind him. I thought about the kitchen. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the Caleb Future Fund that had swallowed my savings. I thought about the text message with the meme and the $22 calamari. They had not hesitated to sacrifice my financial future for a wedding reception. They had not hesitated to commit a felony against me. They just assumed I would never call it by its true name. They counted on my silence. They counted on the fact that I was the heavy one, the one who absorbed the blows. "I do not want to be cruel," I said, turning back to Thorne. He nodded, expecting me to fold. "But I do not want to be a victim," I continued. "I want to be correct. If they signed my name, they broke the law. I am simply reporting the truth. Proceed with option B." Thorne smiled, a small, tight expression of professional respect. "Very well. Let us draft the affidavit." We spent the next hour filling out forms. I listed every unauthorized inquiry. I stated clearly, under penalty of perjury, that I did not apply for the Horizon Valley line of credit or the quick loan. I stated that I did not live at the address on Maplewood Drive. I stated that I had never been employed by Caleb's Media Ventures. When I signed the bottom of the identity theft affidavit, The pen scratching against the paper sounded like a lock clicking shut. "What happens next?" I asked. "We mail these today," Thorne said. "Certified mail. The banks will receive them within 48 hours. Their fraud departments will immediately freeze the accounts and open an internal investigation. The first thing they will do is send a verification notice to the address on the application to demand proof of identity. They will ask the applicant to come into a branch with a government ID that matches the one on file, when your brother, or whoever it was, cannot produce you. The system will flag it as confirmed fraud." I left the office feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't post a cryptic status update on social media. I didn't tell Maya to spread rumors. I just went to work. I assembled 3 bookshelves and a dining table for a client in the suburbs. I focused on the mechanics of the job. Screw A into slot B, tighten, repeat. Reality operates on a delay, but when it catches up, it hits hard. It took 4 days. I was sitting in my studio apartment, eating a sandwich and reading a book on electrical wiring, part of my plan to expand my skills, when my new phone buzzed. I stared at it. It was a number I knew by heart. It was the landline at the house on Maplewood Drive. Thorne had told me this would happen. "They will get the letter from the bank," he had said. "Or the bank will call them demanding to speak to you. They will panic. They will call you." I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. The ringing stopped. Then it started again immediately. I picked it up. I pressed the green button. I didn't say hello. I just held the phone to my ear and breathed. "Ruby?" It was Elaine. Her voice was high, tight, vibrating with a frequency of anxiety I had never heard before. Usually, her voice was dismissive or complaining. This was pure fear. "Ruby, are you there? Pick up the phone." "I am here," I said. "Oh, thank God," she said, letting out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Where are you? We didn't know where you were. You just vanished." It was a lie. They knew I was gone. They just hadn't cared until today. "What do you want, Mother?" I asked. I didn't call her Mom. "What do I want?" She laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "I want to know where my daughter is, and there is something strange going on. We got a letter today from Horizon Valley Bank. It is addressed to you, but it says there is an investigation. It says the loan application has been suspended due to a fraud alert." She paused, waiting for me to jump in, to explain, to fix it. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" Her voice rose an octave. "Ruby, this is serious. They are saying someone reported it as stolen identity. Did you do that? Did you call them?" "I reported unauthorized activity on my credit report," I said calmly. "Someone used my social security number to apply for $25,000. That is a crime. I reported the crime." There was a silence on the other end. It was the silence of someone realizing the landmine they stepped on had just clicked. "Ruby," she whispered, "you need to call them back. You need to tell them it was a mistake." "Why would I do that?" I asked. "It wasn't a mistake. I didn't apply for the loan." "We need that money," she snapped, the mask slipping. It is for family expenses. It is for Caleb's wedding," I corrected her. "I saw the venue deposit on the credit inquiry," Elaine gasped. You know?" "I know everything," I said. "I know about the future fund. I know about the rent money. And I know you tried to mortgage my life to pay for his party." "It is not like that," she cried. "We were going to pay it back. Mark said he would handle the monthly payments. We just needed your credit score because Caleb's is, well, he is young. We were going to tell you." "When?" I asked. "After I was $25,000 in debt? Who signed the application? Mother?" "What?" "Who held the pen?" I asked. "Did you sign my name? Did Dad? Or did Caleb?" "It doesn't matter," she shouted. "We are your family. You don't report your family to the fraud department. Do you know what they threatened in the letter? They mentioned the police. Ruby! The police!" Then you should probably get a lawyer, I said. There was a scuffle on the other end of the line. Muffled voices. Then, a deeper voice came on. Ruby? It was Mark. His voice was calm, measured. The voice he used when he was trying to sell a used car or negotiate a contractor down on price. It was his let's be reasonable voice. Dad, I said. Listen, honey, he said. Your mother is upset. She is blowing this out of proportion, and I think you are too. We made a mistake not asking you first, okay? I own that. I apologize. We were in a bind with the venue, and the deadline was coming up. And we knew you would want to help your brother. Why would I want to help him? I asked. He has never helped me. That is water under the bridge, Mark said quickly, brushing past my grievance. Here is the solution. We do not need lawyers. We do not need banks involved. You just call the bank manager. I know him. Bob Miller, down at the branch. And you tell him you authorized the application verbally. You tell him you forgot. We get the loan approved. I make the payments, and no one gets in trouble. Simple. He said it with such confidence. He really believed that all he had to do was present a logical path, and I would take it, like a good little logistics worker. No, I said. Excuse me? No, I repeated. I will not lie to a federal institution to cover up your fraud. I have already filed the affidavit. I have already filed the police report. It is out of my hands. You filed a police report? Mark's voice lost its smoothness. It became jagged. On your own father? I filed a report on the person who stole my identity, I said. If that turns out to be you, that is your choice, not mine. You ungrateful little... He stopped himself, taking a breath. Ruby, look, if this goes through, they will deny the loan. Caleb loses the venue. He loses the deposit. You are going to ruin his wedding over a technicality. A felony is not a technicality, I said. And if he wants a wedding, he should pay for it. We raised you better than this, Mark spat. We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. And I paid you for it, I said. I paid you $650 a month. I bought my own food. I fixed your house. We are square. Ruby, wait. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline. It was the rush of finally, after 32 years, saying the word no and letting it stand like a brick wall. I put the phone down on the table. Then it buzzed again. A text message. It was not from the landline. It was from a mobile number. Caleb. I opened the message. There was no greeting. No, hi sis. No, are you okay? The text read, just call the bank and sign the paper. I will pay you back when my channel takes off. Stop being such a drama queen. Why do you always have to make everything about you? It is just a signature. I stared at the screen. He didn't get it, even now, with the threat of legal action hanging over his head. He didn't see me as a person with rights. He saw me as an obstacle to his desires. He saw my credit score as an extension of his inheritance. Just a signature, as if my name, my reputation, my financial life were just commodities for him to consume. That text was the final piece of evidence I hadn't realized I needed. It proved intent. It proved he knew about it. It proved he didn't care. I took a screenshot of the text. I opened my email app. I attached the screenshot and sent it to Elias Thorne with the subject line, additional evidence. Then I replied to Caleb. I typed 2 words. Too late. I blocked his number. I sat back in my chair. The sun was setting through the window of my studio apartment, casting long orange shadows across the floor. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like protection. I picked up my book on electrical wiring. I had a chapter to finish. I turned the page, leaving the phone and the family it connected me to, in the dark. The realization hit me on a Wednesday morning while I was standing in the aisle of a hardware store, staring at a wall of deadbolts. For weeks, I had been waiting. I had been waiting for the bank investigation to conclude, waiting for the legal hammer to fall. waiting for my parents to suddenly develop a conscience. I had been operating in a state of defensive suspension, but as I held a heavy brass lock in my hand, feeling its cold, solid weight, I understood something fundamental. I did not need their apology. I did not need Mark to admit he was wrong or Elaine to admit she was cruel. Waiting for an apology was just another way of letting them control my timeline. What I needed was to build something that they couldn't touch, couldn't claim, and couldn't sign my name to. I thought about my grandfather, a man who had calloused hands and a workshop that smelled of sawdust and oil. When I was 10, he taught me how to change a lock. He told me that a lock was not just a mechanism, it was a promise. It was the physical manifestation of the word no. It was how you decided who had access to your sanctuary. I bought the deadbolt. I bought 5 of them. That afternoon, I posted an ad on a local community forum. It was simple. Home security upgrades, deadbolts, smart locks, sensor lights, professional installation, flat rate. I got my first call 20 minutes later. It was an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable who lived alone and was having trouble turning her old, sticky key. I drove over. I removed the old rusted mechanism. I chiseled out the wood frame to make the strike plate sit flush. I installed the new lock. When I handed her the new keys and showed her how smoothly the bolt slid into place with a satisfying, heavy thud, she smiled. "I feel safer already," she said. She paid me $80. It was cash. It was mine. It was the most honest money I had ever earned. That night, Harbor Latch Home Systems was born. I went to Maya with the idea. We sat on her living room floor with a pizza and a sketch pad. "I do not want it to look like a handyman service," I said. "I want it to look like a security firm. I want it to look impenetrable." Maya sketched a logo. It was a stylized anchor that doubled as a keyhole. It was sharp, minimalist, and strong. "Harbor Latch," Maya said, testing the name. "It sounds safe. It sounds like a place you go when the storm is coming." "Make the pricing page the first thing people see," I instructed. "No estimates, no call for a quote. I want fixed prices. Installation is $150. Smart lock setup is $75. Transparency." "Why so rigid?" Maya asked, tapping away on her laptop. "Because I am tired of fine print," I said. "I am tired of hidden costs. I am tired of people saying one thing and charging another. I want my customers to know exactly what they owe before I even walk through the door. I do not want to owe anyone anything, and I do not want anyone to wonder what they owe me." We launched the website 3 days later. The work came in a trickle, and then a stream. I specialized in what I called the threshold. I didn't do full alarm systems with monitoring centers. I did the physical hardening of the home. I installed reinforced strike plates that made doors impossible to kick in. I installed video doorbells so people could see who was knocking without opening the sanctuary. I installed motion sensor floodlights that stripped away the shadows where fear liked to hide. Every time I drove a 3-inch screw into a door frame, I felt like I was reinforcing my own spine. Every time I programmed a smart lock code for a young couple, deleting the previous owner's access, I felt like I was rewriting my own history. I stopped being Ruby the victim. I became Ruby the protector. I formalized the business. I filed for an LLC. I didn't use an online service. I went to the city clerk's office and filed the papers myself. I stood in line, paid the filing fee of $120, and watched the clerk stamp the document. Harbor Latch Home Systems, LLC. I hired a part-time accountant, a meticulous woman named Brenda who wore glasses on a chain and tutted when she saw a receipt that wasn't itemized. "Business and personal do not mix, Ruby," Brenda told me during our first meeting. "We need separate accounts, separate cards, separate lives. If you buy a sandwich while you are working, that is personal. If you buy a drill bit, that is business. We do not cross the streams. I love you, Brenda," I said, and I meant it. Her rigid boundaries were like oxygen to me. I opened the business account, watching the balance grow from 0 to 500, then to 2,000, then to 5,000, It was not a fortune, but it was a fortress. It was money that no one could transfer to a future fund for a golden child. As the business grew, so did my voice. I started a blog on the Harbor Latch website. Initially, it was just for SEO purposes, to drive traffic. I wrote articles like 5 Ways Burglars Check Your House and Why Your Deadbolt is Not Long Enough. But one night, after a particularly long day installing locks for a woman who had just left a bad marriage, I wrote something different. I titled it, Starting Over When No One Is Watching. I wrote, Security isn't just about locks. It is about the permission you give yourself to be safe. Sometimes the most dangerous intruder has a key. Sometimes the hardest door to lock is the one that keeps out the people who are supposed to love you. We are taught that family is an open door, but even family needs to knock. If they don't respect the threshold, change the locks. You are allowed to be safe in your own life. I didn't use names. I didn't mention the fraud. I just wrote about the philosophy of the lock. The post went viral locally. It was shared on community groups, on neighborhood watch pages, on support group forums. 2 weeks later, I received an email from the Stonebridge Echo. It was the most popular podcast in the Tri-City area, hosted by a journalist named Sarah Jenkins, who did deep dives into local stories of resilience and crime. Subject: Interview request. The philosophy of the lock. Dear Ruby, I read your post. It resonated with a lot of people. We are doing a series on rebuilding, and I would love to have you on to talk about Harbor Latch and the story behind the blog post. We can keep it focused on the business, but I think your perspective on safety is something our listeners need to hear. My first instinct was to say no. The old Ruby, the one who lived in the shadows of the Harris household, would have been terrified. She would have thought, who am I to speak? I am just the logistics girl. I am just the background character. But then I looked at my hands. They were covered in drywall dust and grease. They were strong hands, I replied. I would be happy to talk, but I have one condition. I do not mention the names of the people who made me start this business. They do not get free airtime. Sarah agreed. I went to the studio on a Thursday morning. It was a small soundproof room, lined with acoustic foam. I put on the headphones. So, Sarah said, her voice warm and professional in my ear, you went from working in logistics to running your own security firm in less than 4 months. That is quite a pivot. What drove you to locks? I realized that I had spent my whole life ensuring things got delivered to other people, I said, leaning into the microphone. But I never ensured that I was secure myself. I learned that you cannot rely on the goodwill of others to keep you safe. You have to build the mechanism yourself. You wrote in your blog that sometimes the intruder has a key, Sarah said. That is a powerful line. Can you elaborate? We assume danger comes from strangers, I said. We assume it is the person in the ski mask kicking down the door, but often, the person who hurts you most is the person sitting at your kitchen table, the person who knows your social security number, the person who knows your weak spots. Real security is realizing that access is a privilege, not a right. Biology does not grant automatic entry. We talked for an hour. I talked about the technical aspects of a grade 1 deadbolt versus a grade 3. I talked about the psychology of a well-lit porch, but mostly, I talked about the empowerment of taking control of your own environment. When I install a lock for a client, I told Sarah, I am not just selling them hardware, I am selling them the ability to sleep at night. I am selling them the power to say, this is my space, and you cannot come in unless I invite you. That is a power I had to learn the hard way. When the interview ended, Sarah took off her headphones. She looked at me with a strange expression. That was incredible. Ruby, she said, you have a voice. I am just starting to use it, I said. I left the studio and went straight to a job site. I had 3 installs booked. I didn't think much about when the episode would air. I assumed it would be weeks away. I was wrong. The following Friday, I was in my van, organizing my tool belt. My phone started buzzing. Not a call, but notifications. Instagram, Facebook, email. The Stonebridge Echo had just dropped the episode. I opened the podcast app. The title of the episode was The Locksmith of Her Own Life. Ruby Harris on cutting ties and bolting doors. But it wasn't the title that made my breath hitch. It was the thumbnail image. Sarah had asked me for a photo of some of my work to use for the episode art. I had sent her a folder of generic photos I took of my installs. Shiny new smart locks, crisp brass handles, but the image on the screen wasn't one of the new ones. I stared at it, the blood draining from my face, and then rushing back in a flush of hot irony. Sarah's graphic designer must have pulled a stock image, or maybe I had accidentally included an old photo in the zip file from my personal cloud backup. The backup I thought I had scrubbed but perhaps had missed a folder. The photo on the thumbnail was a close-up of a Schlager Camelot keypad deadbolt in aged bronze. It was mounted on a white door with a distinct scratch near the handle. I knew that door. I knew that scratch. I knew that lock. It was the back door of the house on Maplewood Drive. I had installed that lock for my parents 2 years ago. Mark had complained about losing his keys. So I had bought the lock with my own money, $200, and installed it so he could just punch in a code. The code I had programmed for them was Caleb's birthday. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. The cover art for the episode about escaping a toxic family and securing your own life featured the literal door of the house I had escaped from. And then I looked at the date. Today was Friday. Tomorrow, Saturday, was Caleb's wedding. The podcast had dropped 24 hours before my brother was supposed to walk down the aisle at the Grand Oak Estate, if he had managed to find the money to keep the venue after I froze the loan. I sat in my van and started to laugh. It wasn't the bitter, silent laughter of the girl in the kitchen. It was a loud, full-throated laugh. The universe had a sense of humor. I scrolled through the comments that were already pouring in under the episode link. This woman is a hero. I needed to hear this today. Does anyone know if Harbor Latch services the north side? I need to change my locks. Listening to this while driving to my cousin's wedding makes me think about my own family. I tapped on the steering wheel. Caleb and my parents were likely running around today, dealing with the rehearsal dinner, stressing about the finances, trying to keep up appearances. They probably wouldn't listen to a local interest podcast, but their guests would. Tessa's family would. The neighbors would. The people at the bank would. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't orchestrated a takedown. I had just done my work. I had just told my truth. And somehow, the truth had found its way to the exact moment where it would cause the most damage to their carefully constructed lie. I started the van. I had a client waiting in the Heights. A single mother who wanted a peephole installed. I put the van in gear. Let the podcast play. Let the signal travel over the airwaves, through the walls, and right past the keypad lock on Maplewood Drive. I didn't need to be there to see the fallout. I was too busy building my own house to watch theirs burn. The email arrived at 8:30 in the morning, landing in my Harbor Latch business inbox with a cheerful ping that belied the bomb it carried. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, reviewing invoices for the week, when the name on the screen made my hand freeze over the mouse. Subject: Urgent Inquiry. New Home Security Install. From Tessa Vale. I knew the name. Tessa Vale was the woman wearing the diamond ring I was currently paying for via a fraudulent loan that was racking up interest at 22%. She was the woman smiling next to my brother in the Instagram photo that had launched my legal offensive. I opened the email. Hi, Harbor Latch team. I am getting married this weekend. Crazy timing. I know. But we are moving into our new townhouse on Monday immediately after the wedding. I listened to the owner's interview on the Stonebridge Echo podcast yesterday while running errands, and I was so moved. I want that kind of security for our new start. We need smart locks on the front and back doors, plus a video doorbell. Can you fit us in for an install today or tomorrow morning? I know it is last minute, but I'm happy to pay a rush fee. Address: 12 Oak Ridge Lane. I stared at the address. 12 Oak Ridge Lane. It was a new development on the affluent side of town. The kind of place where the driveways were paved with brick and the HOA fees cost more than my monthly food budget. Caleb had posted a photo of the sold sign on his Facebook page a month ago with the caption, Our first empire. I knew for a fact that Caleb could not afford a townhouse at Oak Ridge. I knew his credit score was hovering in the mid-50s unless he had successfully stolen someone else's. I knew my parents had zero liquidity, which meant this house, like the wedding, like the ring, was likely built on a foundation of debt, lies, and perhaps another victim I hadn't met yet. Tessa did not know who I was. On the podcast, I had only been introduced as Ruby, and my website only listed me as R. Harris to her. I was just a vendor with a compelling backstory. I leaned back in my chair. The ethical thing to do, according to a standard moral compass, would be to decline, conflict of interest, too messy. But I wasn't operating on a standard moral compass anymore. I was operating on the physics of leverage. If I didn't go, someone else would install those locks. Someone else would hand Tessa the keys to a life that wasn't actually hers. Tessa would walk into that marriage thinking she was marrying a successful entrepreneur, supported by a loving, slightly quirky family. She would have no idea that she was marrying a man who would commit a felony against his own sister for a centerpiece. I hit reply. Dear Tessa, I have an opening this afternoon at 2 o'clock. The rush fee is $75 on top of the standard installation rate. I can have the system fully operational before your ceremony. Best, Ruby, she replied in 3 minutes. You are a lifesaver. See you then. I spent the next hour preparing. I wasn't just packing drills and strike plates. I was packing the truth. I sat down at my typewriter, an old machine I had bought at a thrift store because I liked the permanence of ink on paper, and I typed a single page. I didn't rant. I didn't use capitalization for emphasis. I simply listed the dates. Date: January 29th. Incident: Parents wish I did not exist. Date: April 15th. Incident: Identity theft for $25,000. Date: April 20th. Incident: Refusal to admit fraud. At the bottom, I wrote one sentence. You are marrying a man who funded your ring by stealing my identity. Ask about the money before you ask about the wedding photos. I folded the paper. I put it in a thick, cream-colored envelope. I sealed it with wax. On the front, I wrote in clear, block letters, for Tessa, open after the honeymoon. I didn't want to ruin her wedding day. That felt cheap. I wanted to give her the option to save her marriage, or end it, based on facts. I wanted her to have the security I never had, the security of knowing exactly who was sleeping next to her. I arrived at 12 Oak Ridge Lane at 1:55. The townhouse was beautiful. I had to admit, it had a dark wood door and large bay windows. I parked my van, which now sported the Harbor Latch logo on the side, and walked up the path with my tool bucket. Tessa opened the door before I could ring the bell. She was younger than she looked in photos, perhaps 24, with bright, anxious eyes and hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing a t-shirt that said, Bride Mode. Ruby, she exclaimed, ushering me in. Thank you so much. I know this is insane. The caterer just canceled the vegan options, and the florist is asking for more money, and I just needed one thing to go right today. I can make the locks go right, I said. Stepping into the foyer, it smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. The rest is out of my jurisdiction. You are exactly like you sound on the podcast, she said, laughing as she led me to the kitchen door. So calm. Must be nice. My fiancé's family is, well, they are a lot. I love them. But his mom is currently hyperventilating about the seating chart, and his dad is trying to micromanage the DJ. I set my bucket down. Weddings bring out the truth in people, I said neutrally. Tell me about it, Tessa sighed, leaning against the quartz island. And there is this whole drama with his sister. Apparently, she ran off a few months ago. Caleb says she is mentally unstable and just disappeared to hurt them. Can you imagine? Just leaving your family like that? I picked up my drill. I checked the battery. It was fully charged. I can imagine it, I said. Sometimes leaving is the only way to stay sane. Tessa looked at me, her eyes widening slightly. Right, the podcast. You cut off your family too. God, I hope Caleb's sister listens to your episode. Maybe she would realize how much she is hurting them. They are such good people. Mark and Elaine, that is his parents. They would give you the shirt off their backs. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. They would give you the shirt off my back, I thought, and then charge me for the laundering. Let us get this deadbolt installed, I said. I worked efficiently. I removed the builder grade lock. I chiseled the frame to accept the heavy-duty strike plate. I moved with the precision of a surgeon. Tessa watched me for a while, then wandered off to take a call from a bridesmaid. I was finishing the front door, tightening the final screw on the keypad. When a car pulled into the driveway, I recognized the engine sound. It was Mark's truck. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my sternum, then settled into a cold rhythm. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I stood up, wiped the wood shavings from my hands, and waited. The front door opened. "Babe, we brought the centerpieces." Caleb's voice boomed into the hallway. "Mom thinks the gold spray paint looks amazing." He stepped in, holding a cardboard box. Mark was right behind him, carrying a garment bag. Caleb looked up. He saw the tool bucket. He saw the new lock. And then he saw me. The box in his hands slipped. It didn't crash, but it slid awkwardly down his chest before he caught it against his belt buckle. His face went through a rapid series of contortions: confusion, recognition, terror, and finally, a pale, waxen mask of shock. "Ruby," he whispered. It wasn't a greeting. It was an involuntary expulsion of air. Mark stopped mid-step. He looked at me, then at Caleb, then at Tessa, who was coming down the stairs. "Babe, look," Tessa said, beaming. "This is Ruby from Harbor Latch, the one I told you about. She got the smart locks installed in record time." The silence in the hallway was thick enough to choke on. Caleb stared at me like I was a reanimated corpse holding a Makita drill. He looked at Tessa, terrified that she already knew. "Hi," Caleb choked out. His voice was an octave higher than usual. "Hello," I said. I didn't say his name. I turned to Tessa. "The system is active. The master code is set to the default we discussed. You can change it in the app." Mark found his voice first. He dropped the garment bag on the floor and stepped forward, placing his body between me and Tessa, creating a physical barrier. "Tessa." "Honey," Mark said, his voice straining for casualness, but hitting a sharp, aggressive note. "Why don't you go check the spray paint in the car? I think it might be leaking." "What? Oh no," Tessa panicked. "My dress is in there." She ran past us, out the door, oblivious to the fact that the air pressure in the room had just dropped to crush depth. As soon as the door clicked shut, my new lock latching perfectly, Mark turned on me. His face was a mottled red. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. He kept his voice low, glancing at the door. "Are you insane? You come to his house? On the day before his wedding?" "I was hired," I said calmly. "Tessa emailed me. I run a business. I don't check the family tree of every client." "You are sick," Caleb said. He had put the box down and was backing away, as if I were radioactive. "You are doing this to freak me out. You are doing this to ruin it." "I am doing a job," I said. "The lock is installed. The bill is $325. You can pay by card or cash." "Get out," Mark snarled. He grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, familiar. It was the grip of a man who was used to moving people like furniture. "You get out of here before I call the police." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then I looked up at his eyes. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Call them. I have the case number for the identity theft report in my pocket. We can ask the officers to check the status of the investigation while they are here. I am sure they would love to speak to the suspect." Mark released my arm as if it had burned him. He stepped back, his eyes darting to the window to make sure Tessa wasn't coming back. "How much do you want?" Mark whispered. "Is that it? You want money? We will pay you. Just leave. Just disappear again." "I do not want your money," I said. "I never did. I just wanted my own." I picked up my bucket. I walked to the small table in the entryway where I had placed the handover package, the warranty information, the user manual, and the thick, cream-colored envelope. "What is that?" Caleb asked, eyeing the envelope. "Documentation," I said. I looked at Caleb. He looked polished, handsome, and completely hollow. He was a man made of other people's sacrifices. "Tessa is a nice girl," I said. "She offered me water. She tips well." "Don't you say a word to her," Caleb pleaded, his bravado crumbling into the pathetic whine of a child. "Please, Ruby, just let me have this. I will pay off the loan, I swear, once the channel takes off." "The channel isn't going to take off, Caleb," I said, "and the loan is already frozen. You are starting a marriage on a crime scene." The front door handle turned. Tessa bustled back in. "False alarm," she said breathlessly. "The paint is fine." "Mark, you scared me to death." She looked at the three of us. The tension was palpable, vibrating in the air. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her smile faltering. "You guys look intense. Do you know each other?" Mark opened his mouth to lie. Caleb looked at the floor. "We have met," I said smoothly. "Small town." I handed the packet to Tessa. "Here is your user guide," I said, "and inside is a personal note from me. Just some advice on security and maintenance. I recommend you read it after things settle down, maybe after the honeymoon." Tessa took the envelope. She held it against her chest, right over her heart. "You are so sweet," she said. "Thank you, Ruby." "You are welcome," I said. I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at Mark. He was staring at the envelope in Tessa's hand with a look of pure terror. He knew he couldn't snatch it from her without raising questions. He knew he was trapped by his own charade. "Mark," I said. He flinched. "You said earlier that I was ruining the wedding," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I am not ruining anything. I am just fixing the locks. If the house falls down because the foundation is rotten, that is not the fault of the locksmith." I walked out. I closed the door behind me. I heard the heavy thunk of the deadbolt sliding home. It was a beautiful sound. I got into my van and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I had left behind. I had left them with a ticking time bomb wrapped in cream-colored paper, and for the first time in history. The control was not in their hands. It was in the hands of the girl they had underestimated. I drove away from 12 Oak Ridge Lane with the radio off. The silence in my van was heavy, but it was a different kind of weight than the one I had carried for years. It was the heavy calm of a demolition expert who has just pressed the plunger and is waiting for the shockwave to travel through the ground. I did not stay to watch the explosion. I did not need to see Mark sweating through his dress shirt or Caleb trying to smile while his eyes darted around the room in terror. I left the scene because my part was done. I had secured the house, and I had delivered the key to the truth. The rest was up to gravity. The wedding was scheduled for 4 o'clock. By 3:30, I was back in my studio apartment, polishing my boots. I had a normal evening planned. I was going to invoice 3 clients, clean my tools, and eat takeout. But the digital world does not sleep, and it certainly does not respect wedding blackout periods. The podcast episode from the Stonebridge Echo had been live for 6 hours. I sat at my desk and watched the metrics climb. It was getting shared, a lot. But the real fire started in the comment section. Sarah, the host, had made a small, unintentional error in the outro. In the interview, I had asked not to name my family, and she had respected that. But at the very end of the recording, in her sign-off, she had said, "Huge thanks to Ruby Harris from Harbor Latch for sharing her story today." She had used my full name, and Stonebridge, despite its attempts to be a city, was still a small town at heart. I watched the comments roll in real time. User Susan M. wrote, "Ruby Harris? Is this the same Ruby who is Mark and Elaine's daughter? I thought she moved away years ago." User P. Henderson replied, "I went to high school with Caleb Harris. This sounds exactly like their family dynamic. Wait, Is the door in the thumbnail their back door? That scratch looks familiar. The smoke was starting to rise. I could only imagine the scene at the Grand Oak estate. The guests would be arriving, holding gifts wrapped in silver paper, checking their phones while they waited for the ceremony to begin. They would see the notification. They would see the post shared by a mutual friend. They would listen to the first 5 minutes where I described, in vivid, clinical detail, how a family could erase a person while still using their credit score. I learned later, from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years who messaged me secretly, that the whispers started in the pews before the bride even walked down the aisle. "Who is Ruby?" someone whispered in the third row. "I heard she is the sister," another replied. "But Mark said they only have a son." No, Elaine said Ruby was away on business, but this podcast says she was homeless for a month. The questions spread like a contagion. They moved from the back rows to the front. They hovered over the flower arrangements. Elaine was the first to crack. My cousin told me that when Aunt Linda asked her point blank why Ruby wasn't a bridesmaid, Elaine's smile twitched so hard it looked like a spasm. "Ruby is very busy," Elaine had said, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. "She is working on a big project. She could not get away. You know how she is. Career first." But the podcast was playing in people's cars. The guests knew the timeline. They knew I wasn't away on business. They knew I was in Stonebridge, installing locks, hiding in plain sight. The gap between Elaine's story and the reality was 3 months wide, and everyone was staring into the abyss. Caleb, the prince of the hour, was reportedly unraveling. He was supposed to be the center of attention, the golden boy marrying the beautiful girl. But the spotlight had shifted. He wasn't the star anymore. He was the suspect. Every time he saw a guest looking at their phone, he flinched. He snapped at the wedding planner. He yelled at a waiter for filling his water glass too high. He was losing control of the narrative. And for a narcissist, that is a fate worse than death. He blamed me, of course. I could hear his voice in my head, echoing the text he had sent. "You are ruining this. You are doing this to hurt me." He didn't understand that the truth does not care about timing. The truth is not a wedding guest that waits to be invited. It kicks the door down. And then there was Tessa. I thought about her standing at the altar. I wondered if she felt the tension radiating off her future husband. I wondered if she noticed the way Mark pulled guests aside to clarify rumors that hadn't even been spoken aloud yet. Tessa did not open the envelope immediately. She was trying to survive the day. She walked down the aisle. She said, "I do." She smiled for the cameras. But the seed I had planted in the hallway was already taking root. During the reception, while Caleb was doing a frantic lap of the room to perform happiness, Tessa took a moment in the bridal suite. She pulled out her phone. She had seen the notifications too. She saw the link to the podcast episode titled "The Locksmith of Her Own Life." She put in her earbuds. She pressed play. She heard my voice. It wasn't the voice of a crazy woman. It was the voice of the technician who had just installed her deadbolt. She listened to the part where I described the moment I found out about the fraud. The application stated the loan was for event costs. I said on the recording, it was $25,000, the exact cost of a venue deposit for a luxury wedding. Tessa froze. She knew the cost of the Grand Oak estate. The deposit was exactly $25,000. Caleb had told her he covered it with a bonus from a brand deal. He had shown her a screenshot of a bank transfer. A screenshot that, in retrospect, looked blurry and cropped. The reception continued. But the shine was gone. The photos were being taken. But the truth was refusing to stand outside the frame. Every smile was strained. Every toast felt like a cover-up. It wasn't until the next morning that the final wall collapsed. They had moved into the townhouse, the one I had secured. The boxes were stacked in the living room. Caleb was asleep, exhausted from the effort of holding up a collapsing sky. Tessa sat at the kitchen island. The morning sun was hitting the quartz countertop, illuminating the stack of handover documents I had left. She reached for the cream-colored envelope. For Tessa. Open after the honeymoon. She didn't wait for the honeymoon. The honeymoon was over before it began. She broke the wax seal. She pulled out the single sheet of paper. There were no insults. There were no ranting paragraphs about how terrible my childhood was. There were just the facts, the dates, the incidents, and then, at the bottom, the sentence that I knew would haunt her. If he ever told you that Ruby does not exist, ask him why he needed her credit score to buy your ring. Tessa put the paper down. Her hands were trembling. She stood up and walked to the pile of paperwork Caleb had left on the desk in the corner. The house file. She began to dig. She wasn't looking for wedding photos. She was looking for financial DNA. She found the closing disclosure for the townhouse. She found the proof of funds. There was a deposit listed. $15,000. Source: personal loan. C. Harris. But below that, there was a small notation on the bank statement he had submitted. Transfer from quick loan financing. Tessa frowned. Caleb didn't have a quick loan account. He had told her he used a prime lender. She went to her own laptop. She logged into the joint account they had opened last week for household expenses. She saw a pending transaction. Verify deposit. Horizon Valley Bank. She sat back. The podcast. The letter. The numbers. It all aligned into a perfect, terrifying picture. The money for the house wasn't from a brand deal. The money for the wedding wasn't from savings. It was stolen. It was stolen from the woman who had stood in this very kitchen yesterday and installed the locks to keep intruders out, while the real thief was moving his boxes in. Tessa? Caleb stood in the doorway. He was wearing pajama pants and rubbing his eyes. He looked young and soft and harmless. "Why are you up so early?" he asked. "Come back to bed." Tessa did not move. She swiveled the stool around to face him. She held up the cream-colored letter. Caleb's face changed instantly. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by the same look of terror I had seen yesterday. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was sharp. "Ruby left it," Tessa said. "She left it right here. Did you know she was the installer?" "She is crazy, Tessa," Caleb said, walking into the room, his hands up in a defensive posture. "I told you, she is obsessed with ruining my life. Whatever she wrote in there is a lie. She is jealous because Mom and Dad love me more. It is sick. Really. She says you stole her identity," Tessa said. She kept her voice flat. "She says you took out a $25,000 loan in her name to pay for the venue. And the ring," Caleb laughed. It was a brittle, cracking sound. "That is insane. Why would I need her money? I have my own money. Look at this house. Look at the wedding we just had." "Show me the receipt," Tessa said. "What?" "Show me the receipt for the venue deposit," Tessa said. "Show me the transfer from your account. If you have your own money, prove it." Caleb stopped walking. He crossed his arms. "I do not have to prove anything to you. I am your husband. You should trust me, not some bitter woman who hasn't been home in 3 months." "She hasn't been home because you wish she didn't exist," Tessa said. Quoting the letter, "Is that true? Caleb? Did you wish she was gone?" "It was a joke," Caleb shouted. The sudden volume made Tessa flinch. "It was just a joke in the kitchen. God, she takes everything so seriously. That is why no one likes her. That is why Mom and Dad are relieved she is gone." "So you admit it," Tessa said. "You admit you drove her away." "I didn't drive her away," Caleb yelled. "She left. She abandoned us. And yeah, maybe I used her name on a form. So what? She is family. She owes us. She lived in that house for 30 years practically for free." The air in the kitchen seemed to vanish. "You used her name on a form," Tessa repeated slowly. Caleb realized what he had said. He tried to backpedal, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "I mean, I didn't. Mom and Dad said it was okay. They said Ruby would want to help. It was just a signature. Tessa, it was a formality. I was going to pay it back. It is not like I robbed a bank." "You committed fraud," Tessa said. "You committed a felony against your sister to impress me." "I did it for us," Caleb pleaded. moving toward her. I wanted you to have the perfect wedding. I wanted you to have this house. I did it because I love you. No, Tessa said, standing up and backing away from him. You did it because you are empty. You have nothing. Caleb, this house is a lie. The wedding was a lie. And you? She looked at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. You are just a copy of a person. You can't say that, Caleb spat. We are married. You are stuck with me. Tessa looked at the front door, the door with the brand new deadbolt, the door I had secured for her. The marriage license hasn't been filed yet, Tessa said softly. My mom has it. She was going to mail it on Monday. Caleb's eyes went wide. Tessa, don't, he warned. Don't you dare. And regarding the house, Tessa said, picking up her phone, my name is on the deed, but my money isn't in it yet. I haven't transferred my down payment. You are overreacting, Caleb screamed. It is just money. It is just a family dispute. It is not a dispute, Tessa said. It is a crime. And you just admitted to it. She looked down at the paper in her hand again. If he said Ruby doesn't exist, ask why. You tried to erase her, Tessa said. But you just erased yourself. She walked to the door. Caleb lunged for her, grabbing her wrist. You are not leaving, he shouted. What will people think? We just got married yesterday. Tessa looked at his hand on her wrist. Then she looked at the heavy brass lock on the door. She remembered what I had told her during the install, when I showed her how the mechanism worked. It is designed to keep threats out, but it is also designed to let you leave quickly in an emergency. The thumb turn is smooth. One motion. She twisted her wrist, breaking his grip, not because she was stronger, but because he was shocked that she resisted. She turned the thumb turn. The bolt slid back with a smooth, oiled click. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Where are you going? Caleb screamed from the doorway, looking wild and desperate in his pajamas. I am going to find a lawyer, Tessa said. And then I am going to find Ruby. She walked down the path, past the sold sign, past the perfect brick driveway. She didn't have her car keys, so she just walked. She walked with the same steady rhythm I had used when I left the house on Maplewood Drive 3 months ago. I didn't know this was happening at that exact moment. I was miles away, eating a bagel and reading a book, but I felt a shift in the air. It was the feeling of a balance being restored. The photo was ruined, the frame was broken, and the truth was finally standing in the center of the picture, ugly and undeniable. The phone call from Caleb came exactly 45 minutes after I watched Tessa walk away from the townhouse. I was sitting in my van, parked 2 streets over, eating a cold bagel. I had expected the call. In fact, I had been counting down the seconds. When my phone vibrated, flashing the number I had blocked but which could still leave voicemails, I decided to answer. I wanted to hear the sound of the collapse. You ruined my life, Caleb screamed the moment I picked up. There was no greeting, no preamble, just raw, high-pitched hysteria. Are you happy now? Tessa left. She actually left. She took the car and drove to her mother's house. I chewed my bagel slowly. I did not make her leave. Caleb, the truth made her leave. You humiliated me, he shouted. I could hear things breaking in the background, glass shattering against a wall. You came to my house. You planted that letter like a bomb. You made me look like a criminal in front of my wife. You are a criminal, I said calmly. And she is not your wife yet. The license has not been filed. Shut up, he shrieked. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous because I am the one who actually does things. I have dreams. You just have boxes. You are a worker drone. Ruby, that is all you are. And now you are trying to drag me down to your level. I am not dragging you anywhere, I said. I am just standing still. You are the one sinking. I told you. Caleb, I stopped covering for you. This is what you look like without my credit score to hold you up. Fix it, he demanded, his voice cracking. Call her. Tell her you lied. Tell her you are crazy. Tell her it was a prank. If you don't, I swear to God." "You will what?" I asked. "Forge my signature again?" "You cannot afford to threaten me. Caleb, you are currently under investigation for bank fraud. I suggest you save your energy for your defense attorney." I hung up. I blocked the number again. This time, I blocked it at the carrier level. The silence that followed was short-lived. The digital assault began an hour later. It started with an email from Elaine. The subject line was simply, "Family." I opened it on my laptop while sitting in a coffee shop downtown. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, a wall of text designed to bury the facts under layers of guilt. "Ruby." She wrote, "I do not know who you have become. The daughter I raised would never try to destroy her brother's happiness on his wedding weekend. We are all in shock. Caleb is devastated. He is crying in his room like a little boy. Regarding the bank misunderstanding, you are taking this way too far. Yes, maybe we cut a corner. Maybe we should have asked, but we were desperate. Ruby, the venue demanded the deposit, and your father's bonus was delayed. We intended to pay it back. We always intended to pay it back. You know how hard it is for us right now. Mark's blood pressure is up. My back is hurting, and instead of helping, you call the police? And that comment in the kitchen? The one you are so obsessed with? It was a joke. Ruby, just a silly, meaningless comment. People say things they do not mean when they are tired. You are holding on to a grudge over a sentence. Is a sentence worth destroying this family? Please, honey, call the bank. Withdraw the report. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We can fix this. We can be a family again. Just come home." I read the email twice. The old Ruby would have cracked. The old Ruby would have felt the familiar weight of responsibility, the guilt of causing her mother pain. But the new Ruby, the one who installed deadbolts for a living, saw the email for what it truly was, a breach attempt. She was trying to pick the lock of my conscience with a rusted key. I hit reply. I didn't write a paragraph. I wrote 2 sentences. Fraud is not a misunderstanding, and a joke is only funny if both people are laughing. I sent it. Then came the negotiator. Mark did not email. He called my business line from a number I didn't recognize, likely a burner phone or a neighbor's landline. "Harbor Latch Security," I answered automatically. "Ruby, it is your father," Mark said. His voice was low, controlled, devoid of the hysteria that plagued Caleb and Elaine. This was Mark the deal-maker, Mark the man who thought every problem had a price tag. "I am working." "Mark," I said, "do you need a lock installed?" "I need you to be reasonable," he said. "Listen, I have been looking at the numbers. The loan is $25,000, plus the $5,000 from the quick lender. That is $30,000 total." "Your math is correct," I said. "Here is the offer," Mark said. "You go to the police station today. You tell them you found the misplaced consent form. You tell them you gave Caleb permission verbally and you just forgot. You kill the investigation. In exchange, I will sign a promissory note to pay you back the full $30,000 over 5 years, with 5% interest, and we will organize a dinner, a big one. We will invite the aunts and uncles. We will publicly thank you for helping with the wedding. You get your money, you get your recognition, and Caleb gets his wife back." I almost laughed. He was trying to buy my integrity with my own stolen credit and a pot roast. "You are missing the point," I said. "I do not want the money. The bank will absolve me of the debt once the fraud is proven. I do not need you to pay me back because it is not my debt. It is yours. If the fraud is proven, they will arrest your brother," Mark said, his voice hardening. "Do you understand that? He will have a record. He will never get a good job." "He does not have a job now," I pointed out. "And maybe a record is what he needs to learn that he is not the center of the universe." "You are being vindictive," Mark snapped. "I am being a mirror," I said. "I am showing you exactly what you built. Here is my counteroffer. Mark, and it is non-negotiable." "What?" he asked warily. "I do not want money. I do not want a dinner. I want a written admission, I said. I want a notarized letter, signed by you and Caleb, stating that you accessed my personal information without my consent and applied for those loans. I need it for my files. I need it to ensure that if you ever try to use my name again, I can skip the investigation and go straight to sentencing. I am not signing a confession, Mark said instantly. Then I am not withdrawing the report. I said, good luck with the investigation. I heard the bank has security cameras. I hung up. The ripple effect spread outward. By Monday morning, the extended family had chosen sides. The phone I used for business started receiving text messages from cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas 2 years ago. Cousin Sarah, the one who always borrowed money, texted, I cannot believe you would do this to your own parents. Aunt Elaine is in the hospital with a panic attack. I hope you are happy. I didn't reply. Uncle Ben, Mark's younger brother, who had always been the black sheep, sent a different kind of message. Just heard the podcast and the rumors. If half of what you said is true, you should have burned the house down. Proud of you. Kid, keep your head up. It was validating. But validation does not pay legal fees or fix credit scores. The most important message came at noon. It was from Tessa. Ruby, I am staying at a hotel. I have not spoken to Caleb since yesterday. I need to know the full extent of it. If I am going to annul this marriage, I need facts, not stories. Facts. I respected that. Tessa was waking up. I compiled a dossier. It was clean, organized, and devastating. I included the credit report screenshots. I included the time-stamped text from Caleb saying, it is just a signature. I included the email from the bank confirming the fraud alert. I sent it to her with a note. This is everything I have. Use it to build a wall he cannot climb over. Tessa replied with a single word. Received. On Tuesday. The hammer finally fell. I received a call from Elias Thorne, my lawyer. We have an update from the bank's internal investigation unit, Thorne said. They pulled the surveillance footage from the Stone Creek branch for the date of the application. And? I asked, holding my breath. It is clear as day, Thorne said. A young male, matching the description of Caleb Harris, sits down with a loan officer. He presents identification. He signs the documents. But here is the interesting part. Ruby. He wasn't alone. My grip on the phone tightened. Who was with him? An older woman, Thorne said. She does most of the talking. She hands the officer the documents from her purse. She is the one who points to the signature line. Elaine. My mother hadn't just known about it. She hadn't just allowed it. She had facilitated it. She had driven him to the bank. She had coached him. She had carried the pen. Do they have audio? I asked. No audio, Thorne said. But the loan officer has provided a statement. He recalls the woman saying that her daughter, you, was in the hospital and couldn't come in, but that you had pre-signed the forms. They played the medical emergency card to bypass the in-person requirement for the primary borrower. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. They had used my non-existent illness as a tool. They had turned my life into a tragedy to fund a celebration. What happens now? I asked. The bank is pressing charges, Thorne said. They have zero tolerance for familial fraud when it involves staff deception. They are forwarding the file to the district attorney. The news must have reached Maplewood Drive at the same time. Because the implosion was instantaneous. According to Uncle Ben, who was now my mole inside the family group chat, the circular firing squad had assembled. Caleb told the police, who showed up at the door on Tuesday evening, that he was coerced. He claimed Elaine told him it was legal. He claimed he didn't know it was a crime. He threw his mother under the bus so fast he didn't even check for traffic. Elaine, in turn, turned on Mark. She told the police that Mark was the one who managed the finances. She said Mark told her to take Caleb to the bank. She claimed she was just a dutiful wife following orders. Mark, the neutral party, the man who just wanted peace, found himself with no allies. He tried to blame the system, the bank, the economy, and finally, me. But the police were not interested in his philosophy. They were interested in the forgery. It was a tragedy. but it was a tragedy of their own writing. I watched it from a distance, feeling a strange mixture of pity and relief. That evening, I went back to my apartment. I was tired. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying a heavy shield for too long. I checked my mail. There was a stack of envelopes, bills, flyers, and a yellow forwarding sticker on a white envelope. It was a piece of mail from my old address. It must have been stuck in the postal system for months, or perhaps it had been delivered to a neighbor who finally dropped it in the mailbox. The postmark date was January 15th, 2 weeks before I left. 2 weeks before the comment in the kitchen. It was from a different bank, a mortgage lender. I opened it. It was a pre-approval notice for refinancing. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Harris, we are pleased to inform you that we can proceed with the refinancing of your home equity line of credit, contingent on the co-signature of the additional guarantor listed on your preliminary application. Ruby Harris. I stared at the paper. The date, January 15th. They hadn't just decided to use me in April because they were desperate for the wedding. They had been planning to use me in January. Before the joke in the kitchen, before I disappeared, they were already filling out applications with my name. They were already planning to shackle me to their debt for another 30 years. If I hadn't left, if I hadn't walked out that door, I would have come home one day to find a pen in my face and a guilt trip about how we need this for the house. The comment in the kitchen, I wish it was just Caleb, wasn't just a cruelty, it was a lie. They didn't wish I didn't exist. They needed me to exist. They needed me to exist so they could drain me dry. My disappearance didn't cause the financial abuse. It just interrupted a harvest that was already scheduled. I put the letter down. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. I took a deep breath. I wasn't the villain of this story. I wasn't the victim. I was the escapee. And for the first time, I realized just how close a call it had been. I hadn't just walked away from an insult. I had walked away from a trap. I took the letter and placed it in my file, right next to the affidavit. It was the final nail. I picked up my phone and sent one last text to Uncle Ben. Let me know when the arraignment is. I might actually show up for family time. Then I turned off the lights and went to sleep, safe behind the lock I had installed myself. The decision to meet them was not born out of nostalgia. It was a logistical necessity. To close a file permanently, you cannot just walk away from the paperwork. You have to sign the final release. I agreed to meet Mark and Elaine at The Grind, a coffee shop in the downtown district that was equidistant from my old life and my new one. It was neutral ground. It was public. It was safe. I arrived 20 minutes early. This was a tactic I used in my business now. If you control the environment, you control the outcome. I chose a table near the window but far from the door, giving me a clear line of sight to the entrance without being immediately visible to anyone walking in. I sat with my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the table, clasping a cup of black coffee. I was not the same woman who had huddled in a corner of the kitchen, afraid to make a sound. I was the owner of Harbor Latch Home Systems. I had filed police reports. I had secured homes. I had rebuilt my credit score from the ashes of their fraud. I wore a structured blazer and boots that were made for working, not for hiding. When they walked in, I almost didn't recognize them. Mark looked smaller. His shoulders, usually squared with the arrogance of a man who believes he is always right, were slumped. He wore a dress shirt that looked slightly wrinkled, as if the person who usually managed the household logistics, me, was no longer there to ensure he looked presentable. Elaine looked frail. Her eyes were puffy, darting around the cafe with a nervous energy that made her seem guilty of something even before she sat down. They spotted me. I saw the hesitation in their steps. They were approaching a stranger. "Ruby," Elaine said, her voice trembling as she pulled out the metal chair. "You look different." "I look like myself," I said. "Sit down." They sat. Mark cleared his throat, a sound that used to signal the beginning of a lecture, but now just sounded like a stalling engine. "We are glad you agreed to meet," Mark said, trying to summon his old authority but failing. "This whole thing, it has gotten out of hand. The police coming to the house, the bank investigation, it is too much. Ruby, we are a family. We should not be handling this through lawyers. We are handling it through lawyers because you committed a crime, I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotional vibrato they were banking on. The police are involved because you broke the law. That is not out of hand. That is cause and effect. Elaine reached across the table, trying to touch my hand. I moved my hand 2 inches to the left. She flinched as if I had slapped her. I did not think you hurt us, Elaine whispered, tears instantly welling up in her eyes. It was her go-to defense mechanism, weaponized fragility. That day in the kitchen, I did not know you were standing there. I did not mean it. Ruby, I was just tired. I did not know you were in such pain. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had let me pay rent for 10 years while secretly funneling the money to her golden child. You did not know because you did not look, I said. You claim you didn't know I was in pain, but pain is visible. Mother, exhaustion is visible. You saw me every day. You saw me come home from work. You saw me pay the bills. You didn't see the pain because it was convenient for you to be blind to it. If you acknowledged my pain, you might have had to stop using me. That is not fair, Mark interjected, his face flushing. You are twisting things. We love you, Ruby. We have always loved you. You are reacting to one sentence. You are throwing away 30 years of history over a bad joke. It was not a joke, I said. And it was not one sentence. It was 3 months. I let the words hang there. 3 months, 90 days, 2,160 hours. You say you love me, I continued, looking Mark dead in the eye. But I disappeared. I vanished. My car was gone. My room was empty. And for 3 months, you did not call. You did not text. You did not file a missing persons report. You did not worry. We thought you were busy, Elaine protested weakly. You are always so independent. No, I cut her off. You did not think I was busy. You were relieved. The heavy thing was gone. The atmosphere was light. You enjoyed the silence until you needed a signature. You didn't look for me because you missed me. You looked for me because the bank required a co-signer. I pulled a folder from my bag. I opened it. Inside was a timeline I had created. Here is the invoice of your affection, I said, sliding the paper across the table. January 29th. You wish I did not exist. February through April. 0 contact. April 15th. You forged my signature on a $25,000 loan application. April 20th. You call me. Not to ask if I'm alive, but to tell me to lie to the bank. I tapped the paper. That is not love, Mark. That is a business arrangement where I am the silent partner who covers the losses. If you can go 3 months without noticing your child is gone, that is not love. That is just a habit. Mark looked down at the paper. He couldn't argue with the dates. The ink didn't lie. So what do you want? Mark asked, his voice dropping to a defeatist whisper. You want to punish us? Is that it? You want to see Caleb go to jail? I want clarity, I said. And I want boundaries. The bank investigation is out of my hands. I cannot stop it, and I will not try. Caleb made his choice when he picked up that pen. But for us, here are the terms. I listed them out, counting them on my fingers. 1. I will not meet with Caleb privately. If he wants to speak to me, it will be through my lawyer. I am done being his emotional punching bag. 2. You will never, under any circumstances, use my personal information again. If I see so much as a library book checked out in my name, I will sue you for everything you own, including the house. 3. You will stop trying to rehabilitate the family image using me. Do not tell the aunts I am busy. Do not tell the neighbors we are working through things. Tell them the truth. Tell them I left because I had to. Elaine began to weep softly into a napkin. Can't we start over? She begged. Can't we just try again? We can go to therapy. We can fix this. I looked at her, and I felt a strange sense of peace. I realized that I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her. We cannot start over, I said gentle. Because the foundation is gone. And regarding your question, Mother, you asked why I did this. You think I did this to teach you a lesson. You think I disappeared to hurt you. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I did not disappear to teach anyone a lesson, I said. I disappeared to save myself. I was drowning in that house, and you were standing on my head to keep Caleb dry. I had to swim away. I left a $20 bill on the table to cover my coffee. I didn't want them to pay for me. I didn't want to owe them even the cost of a caffeine fix. Goodbye, I said. I walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I would see them sitting there, two people trapped in a narrative they could no longer control, staring at the empty chair where their scapegoat used to sit. The rest of the week moved with the swift, brutal efficiency of a falling guillotine. The bank concluded its investigation on Thursday. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage of Elaine and Caleb at the bank, combined with my affidavit and the lack of any digital footprint placing me in the city on that date, sealed the deal. Horizon Valley Bank officially declared the loan fraudulent. The debt was removed from my name. My credit report was scrubbed clean. The inquiry deleted as if it had never happened. But for Caleb, the consequences were just beginning. The bank forwarded the case to the district attorney's office. Because of the amount, $25,000, it was a felony charge. He wasn't arrested immediately, but he was served with a summons. He would have to stand before a judge and explain why he thought his sister's life was his property. The social fallout was faster than the legal one. Tessa did not scream. She did not throw a vase. She simply packed her bags. I heard about it from Uncle Ben, who had become the family historian of the collapse. He told me that Caleb had tried to beg, tried to claim that he did it all for her. Tessa had stood in the doorway of the townhouse, the house she legally owned but refused to live in, and delivered the final verdict. I can deal with poverty, Caleb, she had told him. I can deal with struggle, but I will not marry a person who survives by erasing other people. If you could do that to your sister, you would do it to me the moment I became inconvenient. She left the ring on the counter. It was a cubic zirconia replica she had bought to wear while traveling, not the real one he claimed to have bought. She left the real engagement ring, the one bought with my stolen credit, in the box for the police to collect as evidence. Caleb was left alone in the empty townhouse, surrounded by boxes he hadn't unpacked, with a felony charge on his record and a wedding album that would never be printed. As for me, I did not celebrate his downfall. I didn't have time. On Friday afternoon, I received a call from a property management firm. They had seen the news, not the gossip, but the business reviews. My reputation for no-nonsense security had spread. Ms. Harris, the manager said, we manage a complex of 40 luxury townhomes on the north side. We have had some break-ins recently, and the tenants are unhappy with the current locks. We want to upgrade the entire complex. 80 doors, smart locks, reinforced frames, the works. Are you available? It was a contract worth $12,000. It was enough to hire a second crew. It was enough to move out of the studio and into a one-bedroom apartment with a balcony. I drove to their office to sign the contract. I sat in the conference room. The manager slid the paperwork across the polished wood table. Sign here, he said. I picked up the pen. For years, I had made myself small. I had used initials. I had hidden. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote my name in bold, clear cursive. Ruby Harris. I didn't flinch. I didn't worry that someone would link me to the drama. The drama was my armor now. It was proof that I had survived. That evening, I returned to my office, a small commercial space I had just leased for Harbor Latch. It had a large glass window facing the street. I was locking up for the night. I turned the key in the deadbolt, a high-security cylinder that I had chosen myself. The mechanism clicked shut with a sound that felt like a heartbeat. Thunk! I paused. I caught my reflection in the darkened glass of the door. I saw a woman in work boots and a tool belt. I saw a woman with tired eyes but a set jaw. I saw a woman who owed nothing to anyone. For 32 years, I had been the invisible daughter. The heavy one. The one they wished didn't exist. I reached out and touched the cold glass, tracing the outline of my own face. They had gotten their wish. In a way, the old Ruby, the doormat, did not exist anymore. She had died in that kitchen the moment they laughed. But the woman staring back at me? She was real. She was solid. She was built on a foundation of steel and truth. I smiled at my reflection. I see you, I whispered to myself, and for the first time in my life. That was enough. I had chosen my own existence, and no one, not Mark, not Elaine, not Caleb, would ever have the power to wish me away again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from so we can connect and share our thoughts. I invite you to subscribe to the Jane Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your extra support by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.